Our study in the book of Chronicles continues with chapter 12. I've titled this devotional, While There Is Hope, Encourage, Embrace, and Love One Another. I invite you to open your Bible with me to 1 Chronicles 12. Now, in our previous study, 1 Chronicles 11, we examined the names of the mighty men, that is, the great warriors of Israel, when that nation united with Judah and crowned David as king of all Israel. Now, 1 Chronicles 12 continued a record of the names of those warriors who stood out on the battlefield and remained loyal to David. Consider them with me, verses 1 through 40. And here we have four groups of men and tribes who swore allegiance to David. Now, we'll begin chapter 12 and verses 1 through 7 with those who defected from Saul when he was king. And we would refer to them as the defectors from the tribe of Benjamin. Now, some men from Benjamin served David during his exile from Israel and his time among the Philistines in Ziklag, a stronghold for David during his fugitive years. Now, the men of Benjamin, we've already noted in an earlier study, were known as skilled, formidable warriors who could use both the right hand and the left in hurling stones and shooting arrows out of a bow, chapter 12, verse 2, but also seen and recorded in Judges chapter 20. Well, since King Saul was a Benjaminite, the betrayal by warriors from his tribe must have been greatly disheartening to the king. Now, we're also given the defectors from the tribe of Gad, verses 8 through 15. Now, there were also then warriors from the tribe of Gad who also turned away from Israel during the reign of Saul. They joined with Benjamin and came to David in the wilderness. We read of the men of Gad. The Gadites separated themselves unto David into the hold, that is, into the stronghold, to the wilderness men of might, verse 8. So they were obviously a welcome addition to David's band of fugitives during these wilderness years. Well, the Gadites were also described as skilled warriors prepared for hand-to-hand combat, mentioning the buckler, which was a small shield used in sword fighting in verse 8. Now, these Gadites were aggressive fighters, and in battle we read that the faces of the Gadites showed the fierceness of lions. They were also quick on their feet, described as, in verse 8, swift as the roes, literally the gazelles upon the mountains. Well, you'll notice in verse 9 through 13 that there are 7 prominent men of Gad that are named. They are remembered for swimming across the Jordan River in flood stage for the purpose of joining David in verse 15. Well, there were also other defectors from Benjamin and Gad mentioned in verses 16 through 18. And so joining David then later were other children of Benjamin and Judah, verse 16. And to confirm the intentions of the latecomers, David proposed a treaty saying, and I quote, "If you be come peaceably unto me to help me, mine heart shall be knit unto you. But if you come to betray me to mine enemies, seeing there is no wrong in mine hands, the God of our fathers look thereon, and," verse 17, "rebuke it." Well, speaking on behalf of the men of Benjamin and Judah, one named Amasai, I'm hoping I'm saying that right, swore his allegiance to David, saying, "Thine are we, David, and on thy side, thou son of Jesse." Jesse being a man of the tribe of Judah. And they went on and said, "Peace, peace be unto thee, and peace be to thine helpers, for thy God helpeth thee." Then David received them and made them captains of the band. Verse 18. Now, verse 19 through 22 were also given defectors from the tribe of Manasseh. You might remember the Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh were on the east side of the Jordan River, so perhaps that's where these are coming from. Well, 1 Chronicles 12, 19 through 22 then describes a time when David and his men sought refuge from King Saul. They lived among the Philistines. Now, when the Philistines prepared to fight Israel, this is recorded way back in 1 Samuel 29 and verse 30, the Philistine leaders refused to let David and his men be counted among them. Why? The Philistines feared that during the battle with King Saul's army, David would turn his men against the Philistines and reconcile or align with Saul. Now, when David then withdrew from the battle, many men of Manasseh, we read in verse 20, abandoned Saul and they joined David. Well, like other Israelites, they too, the men of Manasseh, were experienced warriors, strengthened David's leadership in Israel. Now, we're also given the names and tribes of the soldiers who rallied to David after Saul's death, verse 23 through 40. So the names of the tribes, the number of the men who went to Hebron after Saul's death are recorded in verse 23 through 40. They came to support David and to turn the kingdom of Saul to him according to the word of the Lord. Now, I'm not going to take time to go through this list of tribes and the thousands of men who pledged allegiance to David. However, I do encourage you to reflect on the character of those who were confident that God had chosen David to be king of Israel. Among those who joined David were men from his tribe, Judah's men. They carried shield and spear. They were, verse 24, ready for battle. There were also the men of Simeon, who were described as mighty men of valor for the war, verse 25. In verse 32, Issachar had insight and discernment. They were wise men. We're also mentioned some of the men of Zebulun, who were expert in war with all instruments of war. Now, of all those men, they were men who were men of valor, courageous men, for they did not break ranks or flee in battle. In verse 33, they were not of a double heart. In other words, they were stable and trustworthy. Well, verse 38 through 40, we have the rally to support and crown David king. 100,000 men from Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, tribes on the east side of the Jordan River, came to Hebron to make David king over all Israel. And all the rest also of Israel were of one heart to make David king. Think about that in verse 38, that wonderful spirit of unity around the fact that David was God's chosen. Now, the tribes of Israel then in verse 39 celebrated David's coronation with a 3-day festival. We read that they enjoyed meat, cakes, wine, and oil provided by the nearby tribes of Issachar, Zebulun, and Naphtali. Well, a closing thought. 1 Chronicles 12 concluded on a memorable note because the men of Israel were, and I quote again, of one heart to make David king. And in verse 40, and there was joy in Israel. Well, like us, David lived in a fallen world and served a nation of sinners. While children's storybooks sometimes end with the phrase, they lived happily ever after, that summary is beyond man's reach in this mortal life. And we'll find in the next chapter, 1 Chronicles 13, will prove to be a tragic time for David. Well, believer, an application. There is joy when God's people and their leaders are united and devoted to God's glory. And still, such joy is temporary and fleeting. However, we should encourage each other. Embrace the joy of unity when you have it and love one another. Well, thank you for being a part of Heart of a Shepherd. God bless, and bye-bye.